I'm just going to read the first paragraph from Wikipedia about surrealism. Surrealism was a cultural movement which developed in Europe in the aftermath of World War I and was largely influenced by Dada. The movement is best known for its visual artworks and writings and the juxtaposition of distant realities to activate the unconscious mind through imagery. To activate the unconscious mind through imagery. Artists painted unnerving, illogical scenes, sometimes with photographic precision, creating strange creatures from everyday objects and developing painting techniques that allowed the unconscious to express itself. Its aim was to, according to leader André Breton, to resolve the previously contradictory conditions of dream and reality into an absolute reality, a super reality, or surreality. It's absolutely clear from this definition that Twin Peaks is surrealist. And it's more justification for looking at what we looked at in our last video about that relationship between the Neshama and the Ruach. The Babylon giving her seed ideas into how should I express this? Plato had this idea that physical objects partake of formative objects, that there is up in our distant memory of the perfect world, there's a form of whiteness and a form of the cylinder, a form of the circular, a form of cardboard, a form of wetness, and that this actual object partakes of all of these, of the forms of all of these metaphysical objects. And I'm saying that wrong. I called this an actual object. For Plato, the forms were the real thing, and it was by remembering this truth that we were exposed to before our birth that we were able to identify and categorize the objects we meet in the real world, in our world, in, let's say, the phenomenal world, borrowing Kantian language. The nominal world of the things in themselves informs the phenomenal world of the objects, the sense objects that we interact with. But we can't know anything about the nominal world. Well, for Plato, we remembered the forms distantly and were categorizing objects according to the forms. For Kant, the things in themselves are unknowable completely, except that whatever this thing is in itself, it must correspond in some way beyond my ken to my experience of it. And so this is what Babylon is doing. Babylon is emanating from generalities to particulars. And there's a demon there. There is also Choronzon. And the dweller on the threshold, this beast, is, let's think of it on the level of epistemology again, is our capacity, which we need to categorize and name things. But we never, ever, ever, ever get to true understanding by our faculty of knowledge. We don't get to be an Athrodath, okay? We need to be able to say, handkerchief, blue, red, plant tape, coffee cup. This is very, very useful. But like Kant says, what this actually is, more than just the softness of the touch and the appeal to my visual senses and the sort of musty smell of like fabric that's been laundered too many times. Those things all point my consciousness in the direction of what's there, but what's actually there is something that I really can't know for sure. And so wisdom comes from letting go. But Karanzan tries to use our faculty of judgment against us. When we say, do not think, I'm ready for samadhi, I'm ready to experience Babylon, I'm going to become a saint this afternoon, I'll dissolve all my blood into the wine cup and become just a little pile of sand in the city of the pyramids. The dweller on the threshold says, you're doing a really good job, and starts to give you ideas about the job you're doing, and you think you're getting information, and you start following these little threads and thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking, and it disturbs the meditation. It stops the process. And if you've been unfortunate enough to take the oath of the abyss, if you're afraid, take the oath of the abyss before you're ready to cross the abyss. Then you can get stuck. You lock up. You give up certain things about yourself, but you lock up a portion of the blood in the body and become what is called a black brother of the left-hand path. And the cry of the black brother is, I am. Because they fear to lose their name, their identity. Judy is kind of a misunderstanding. And Maya too. We live in this world of Maya, this world of illusion, this dream where this is a handkerchief and not the thing in itself beyond the handkerchief. Or whatever is beyond that, maybe for really sincere Hindus. Vedantists, sorry. It's very, very common that this divine feminine principle, this creative principle, this ecstatic principle, which both creates our world and allows us to overcome it, is confused with the masculine principle, the devil, the dweller on the threshold, this monster that forces us to label things even when we decide not to. I say, I want to lose my self-consciousness and become transcendent. And then the dweller starts trying to explain to you how to do that. So Twin Peaks is surrealist in order to get us beyond the contrary conditions of dream and reality and into an absolute reality. Twin Peaks wants us to experience and not evaluate. For the sake of these videos, I will be playing the role of Karanzan. But as a friend of mine used to say, You don't transcend the game of tennis without playing it. You can't be anti-rationalist by being unreasonable. You want to try. Or maybe that's what the Dweller wants you to think. But Twin Peaks is also absurdist. And the absurdists have no metaphysics. The absurdists are existentialist. They can have metaphysics. They can have like scientistic metaphysics. They can believe in atoms if they want. Who cares? They're fine. They're atoms. They're electrons. There's like strings. They can be string theorists. You can be a string theorist and be an existentialist all day long. But they follow Nietzsche in believing that God is dead. God is dead. Marx is dead. And I'm not feeling very well myself. It is a doctrine of absolute freedom because there's no soul. There's no this, the neshama and the ruach and the nefesh and all these namby-pamby little spiritual principles, the angels and the god names and the Lady Babylon and the demon and the dweller and all this stuff. I mean, what is this? Why are we fabulizing? What is the value of fabulizing? You exist. Existence precedes essence. You become your essential self by acknowledging that you exist. So you're in this terrible, terrible condition of having no identity, no destiny, no appropriate divine aspiration. It's just you adrift in the world. I think it's Sartre. It's probably Sartre. Nietzsche is the father of existentialism, but Nietzsche was the grandfather. Sartre's the father. You are doomed to be free. Doomed to be free. Every moment of every day of your life, you are actively making choices. There are no passive choices. You don't go to work because it's your job or because it's a force of habit. You don't have coffee out of force of habit. You decide to have coffee and you decide to go to work. So if you're miserable, it's because you decided to be miserable. And pretending that you don't have a choice puts you in existentialist bad faith. You're lying to yourself and everyone else because you do have choices. You are radically free. So the absurdists depict characters. I mean, my knowledge of this type of writing is not deep. I've seen and read a number of the Samuel Beckett shows, and Samuel Beckett delights in depicting characters who are absolutely paralyzed by their freedom and do nothing or the same thing over and over again for the longest one is Waiting for Godot, which is a full length, maybe like an hour and 20 minutes, and they get shorter and shorter as he writes because the characters do nothing. They just repeat the same actions again and again and again and again because they're in such radical bad faith and they're miserable. This is the existential conundrum. You are free, but you decide not to be. Or you decide to act as if you're enslaved. Something like this. The other way to be in bad faith is to pretend that you're free. To drink coffee every single morning and say, I'm not addicted to caffeine, I'm an existentialist, I could make a new choice any moment I want. No, look, you still have to acknowledge the pattern of behavior. So you can be in bad faith by pretending you can't stop drinking coffee. You can also be in bad faith by saying that you're going to stop drinking coffee. You're in good faith by saying every day you choose to drink coffee. And yes, that makes me an addict. And so one of the things that's difficult to understand about Twin Peaks is that Twin Peaks does have a metaphysics. There are spirits, divine principles, there are holy things and demonic things. So what is going on with this absurdism? It's because Twin Peaks takes place not in some bizarre alternate dimension. Twin Peaks takes place essentially in the real world. And in the real world, there are some people who are in bad faith, and some people who absurdly repeat the same dull, bizarre actions day after day. And then there are some people who try their best and who do engage with divine principles, or who do have aspirations beyond divine principles, or not beyond, but aspirations in lieu of divine principles. So Agent Cooper, for example, represents someone who is choosing to live every moment of his life, whereas many of the other characters, the comedy comes from their foolishness, just like the absurdists, in feeling paralyzed by their options. Lucy, for example, sweet girl, but it never even occurs to her that she could have a different job. Gordon Cole says, Lucy, you've been there all through the years, and she says, no, I've been home to sleep, and once in a while Andy and I go on vacation. I haven't been here all through the years. So the things that are difficult to understand in Twin Peaks are because you have this surrealist thing happening on top. These characters who are living in this super real world of their relationship between their reality and their dream reality, and having aspirations, treating life like a mystery, which is something we do, which is something magicians do. Magicians are interested in mystery. And so having our main character be an FBI agent trying to solve a murder, at least initially, his power as a surrealist protagonist is in treating his life in that way, while other characters, trapped in their Sartian bad faith, are sorry, I just belched. I'm apologizing. I chose to belch into the microphone and failed to edit it out. Chose not to edit it out. Man, it's hard not to be in bad faith, especially when you're displaying bad etiquette. So you have other characters which are these kinds of absurd parodies of real life bad faith characters. And so I'm going to say that the characters in the White and Black Lodge the demons, the angels in the show are not fantasy characters. They're not whole cloth made up to serve the narrative. They are in fact absurd parodies of real metaphysical, or if it's easier for you, if you're an existentialist, at least real epistemological forces. So, the question of who is Judy is not a question of that's wholly answered within the narrative. It's not like who is Sauron in Lord of the Rings. There doesn't need to be a fully realized in-universe answer to that question. Just like there doesn't need to be a fully realized in-universe answer to the question of what is an FBI agent. Because we have an analog to the FBI in the real life. Just as we have an analog to Judy in real life. But it's also not wholly allegorical. So there's another video out there called Twin Peaks Actually Explained No Really, where the guy elucidates a very takes a very prominent theme and talks about how it works through the whole arc, and gives you many examples of how directorial choices and script writing choices are brought forward by or clarified in light of that theme. And it's worth watching, it's good. But it in no way actually explains Twin Peaks, unless you think Twin Peaks is only an allegory. It's a thematically interesting fiction. It's not an allegory. So when we talk about the FBI having an analog to the real FBI in the real world, we're not saying it's an allegory about the FBI, just as when we're talking about Twin Peaks in light of the Qabalah, we're not saying it's an allegory of Kabbalistic principles for teaching Qabalah. We're saying that the Qabalah in Twin Peaks works the way it does because it's a fictional analog of real life Qabalah and real world epistemological and metaphysical principles. So who is Judy in the world, and what's Judy's relationship to Cooper and Cole and the other characters, and what's Judy's relationship to the mystery? Well, it's the same relationship that her analog principle would have to the same mystery in the real world. I'll see you in 10 minutes.